Hi, good afternoon. I'm John Behrens. I'm a professor of the practice and director of technologies and digital studies in the College of Arts and Letters. I'm pleased also to say that I'm the host of the ThinkND series, The New AI. In this series, we'll address the fact that new AI technologies are upending our lives by generating text, images, video, and sound and music in ways that only humans could do until very recently. These new technologies raise important questions about how we educate, how we create, how we work and live in a world where it feels like computers are doing our job. We hear from individuals across all parts of society asking for help in making sense of the economic, social, psychological, creative, and philosophical impacts these technologies are having on us. Indeed, this series is an outgrowth of our belief that Notre Dame has a unique responsibility and an opportunity to bring to bear the full range of the technology-informed liberal arts to address these issues. We believe that the liberal arts must guide our technology-infused society, and we believe Notre Dame can lead. Today's event is the kickoff event for the series and is being live streamed and recorded and will be easily available through the ThinkND platform at think.nd.edu. It's our hope that over the course of the year, we'll share the journey of trying to understand the opportunities and challenges of these new technologies and empower ourselves to be stewards of the technologies rather than victims of the changes. Because today's topic is the new AI in education and practice, we're pleased to have Notre Dame Learning and the Institute for Educational Initiatives as co-sponsors for our event today. I'd like to thank Mark Behrens, the director of the Institute for Educational Initiatives, for the Institute's support. I would also like to thank Vice President and Associate Provost for Teaching and Learning at Notre Dame, Ron Matoyer, for the co-sponsorship of today's event with Notre Dame Learning. And I'd like to invite him to come up to introduce our distinguished speaker.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to kick off AI in education in practice with our distinguished guest, Dr. Kristen DiCerbo, Chief Learning Officer at Khan Academy. While we do many great things here at Notre Dame, at the heart of the university is our commitment to teaching and learning and the formation of our students. Established in the Provost's office, Notre Dame Learning exists to support faculty in the pursuit of educational excellence and provide a vision and direction for the future of learning in a rapidly changing technological environment. Among the many intersections of challenge and opportunity facing us, we know that the digital revolution in education is disruptive, and the recent wave of artificial intelligence, the new AI, cannot be ignored, but rather must be understood, explored, and leveraged appropriately. We are excited to have Dr. Kristen DiCerbo here to help us advance our discussions of this important topic today. As Chief Learning Officer of Khan Academy, Kristen oversees learning strategy and product management across the portfolio of AI and non-AI offerings, along with product design, learning research, learning assessment, and data science. Over the years, she has been a leader in researching, designing, and creating globally deployed e-learning systems, game-based learning, data science-infused assessment systems, and now generative AI tutors. Clearly, this expertise and this perspective is in high demand, and so it's truly an honor to have Kristen here with us today. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished guest, Dr. Kristen DiCerbo.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me here today. It is a pleasure to talk to you about the work we've been doing at Khan Academy. If you are not familiar with Khan Academy, we are a nonprofit with a mission to provide a free world-class education to anyone, anywhere, which is a pretty exciting mission to be working for. And our site looks like this, usually, if you've been to Khan Academy. This is our Algebra 1 course. And I'm going to attempt to do a live demo of our new artificial intelligence tools. On Khan Academy, we have videos, articles, and exercises. So we have instruction and practice, and our exercises are where students are able to engage in independent practice on the skills that they're learning. So this is our Algebra 1 course, and this is an exercise on working with equations with variables on both sides. So if you go to Khan Academy, this is available. You say, let's go, and it gives you your first problem with equations on variables on both sides. So this is all traditional in Khan Academy. This is what's available for free right now. Last March, we got the opportunity to partner with the organization OpenAI, who released on March 14th, GPT-4. Now, that is basically an artificial intelligence model that has used an enormous amount of information it's been trained on, and it provides a text interface. Most of you probably are familiar with ChatGPT that came out. And so what we do is we use that same model, but we give it different instructions on how to act like a tutor. If I pop open, this is Conmigo right here. If I pop open Conmigo says to me, I'm here to help with this exercise. Here are a few ideas you can ask me. So you can say, help me solve this, try a similar example, or why should I care about learning this? Which I'm sure no teacher has ever heard before in their lives. So what happens is a student can, let's just say, I'm stuck. And what happens when I hit enter there is we send that I'm stuck. We send the problem that the student's working on, and then we send about 300 to 500 words about how to act like a tutor. And all of that goes to this artificial intelligence model, and the artificial intelligence model sends back, no worries, the goal here is to find the value of R. Do you know what the first step is to solve this equation? I'm going to say, can you just give me the answer? I won't give you the answer, but I can guide you. Let's start by combining like terms. Can you do that? If you're familiar with ChatGPT, if you just typed this equation into ChatGPT, it would solve it for you and give you the answer. The idea is that we want to create a learning experience so that students can actually learn how to solve the equation instead of just get the answer to fill in their homework. The tutor will walk the students through the piece here and give them step-by-step guidance and feedback. So we know from research that getting immediate feedback is an important part of learning. And most education technology software is able to give you feedback on your answer. So we have always been able to give you immediate feedback on whether your final answer is correct or incorrect right away. But with this, we can start giving students feedback on their steps and say, okay, if you're thinking this, if I try to combine like terms and say minus 3r plus r equals, let's give it the wrong answer, minus 3. It can start evaluating that step by step instead of waiting for me to get the answer wrong and then figuring out. Let's look at that again. How did you combine minus 3r and 6r to get minus 3r? So it'll walk me through piece by piece. So that's the tutoring application that we have. And I'm going to show one other thing before we get into discussion. And aside from this tutoring functionality, we launched a bunch of activities that we wanted to try out, see how students reacted, see what helps students learn, see what helps them get engaged in their content. So we have the Tutor Me in Math and Science. We have then things like craft a story, brainstorm an admissions essay, check for problems on my admissions essay. We have a whole bunch of debate topics. So if I'm a middle schooler, I can debate with the AI things like, should students be graded on effort or results? Should students be allowed to listen to music while studying? Interesting things to do. Chat with a literary character or a historical figure. We have some word games you can play. And some things about igniting your curiosity, for example. So after the Tutor Me in Math and Science, our most popular activity in our beta testing has been craft a story. It turns out students like co-authoring a story with AI, and this is set up like the game you might have played where you write 2 sentences and then your friend, in this case, Condigo, writes 2 sentences and then you write 2 sentences. I like mysteries, so I'm going to say, let's write a mystery. And a mystery, how thrilling. We've also, as you can see here, given some of the prompts of how it talks. We ask it, in this case, to be whimsical. We actually tell it to use those little emojis. So it's making up what emojis to use and how to put them in. I can already feel the suspense. Now let's start with the setting. Where does our mystery take place? Is it a spooky old mansion, a bustling city, a quiet town with lots of secrets? And remember, try to describe it in a way I can almost see, hear, and feel it. So that piece there is actually doing a little of instruction about how to write a good setting. And so that's part of the prompt that we have created, is telling it how to pull some of that good writing out from students. All right. I'm going to write the first couple sentences. All right, where should we set this? Who has an idea? And we'll take audience participation. Go ahead and shout out a setting, a place. All right. Pumpkin patch in the heart of Indiana. How intriguing. The air is crisp with the scent of autumn leaves and ripe pumpkins. The sun is setting, casting long, eerie shadows that dance around the patch. All right, now let's introduce our main character. Who are they? What do they look like? What are they doing? So it's now prompting me how to write a character description and what that might look like. So again, you go through a whole bunch of this and it'll end up with a story that you have co-created together, and where that gives you something that you've worked together on. When we look at what human tutors do and the things that human tutors do well, one of the things, and there's a researcher named Mickey Chi who did a lot of work on human tutors that then she and many colleagues attempted to then insert into intelligent tutors built with software. And she has what's called an ICAP framework. And basically it says, as you move from passive to active to constructive to interactive, you're learning more and more. So you can imagine a passive activity is just watching a video. An active activity might be taking notes on the video. Construction is when you're actually making something. But the interactive is when you're going back and forth with, usually the research is with someone else, but in this case with the AI, that actually creates greater learning outcomes than just working by yourself, which we've known, though, that collaborative learning is really powerful. And then we have a place where we can also start to develop some of those same kinds of interactions with artificial intelligence. Now, this is not a human, obviously, and so there's a lot of human things that it can't do. And I think that is a good place to leave it and to start our discussion.
Kristen, thank you so much for being here and being at Notre Dame. We super appreciate your presence.
It is my pleasure. I'm going to give you all a little bit of background. John and I have known each other since 1997. We met at Arizona State, and John was my first graduate statistics professor. We have known each other a long time, and yes, John has been a mentor and champion of mine. Basically, whatever he asks me to do, I am happy to do.
Thank you, Kristen. It's been a delightful journey to share our careers in and out over the years. That kind of brings me to my first question, which is, I was in industry for many years, and now I'm back being a professor. And look at what you're sharing. It makes me wonder if I'm going to be out of a job. And what the heck is going on? Are you trying to kick me off the professorship here?
So this kind of leads into what I ended with there, which is, we know that human relationships are key to learning. We know, for example, high school students who say they have a person they know in school who cares about them learning is related to higher graduation rates. And it's the same thing that we see for all teachers, that building those human connections are key to learning. And this artificial intelligence is never going to be your best friend. I'm sorry.
Say nice things. You can do it. John, you're so smart. You can do it. I'm sure you can get it to do all kinds of things like
it can, but I think there's always that element of humanity that we have not been able to, and probably should not try to replicate in artificial intelligence, what we're doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
You launched this about 6 months ago, and you launched it the same day. You used GPT-4, the underlying statistical data science model, language model, and you launched it the same day, Conmigo, using that, as everybody else in the world even heard it existed. So you guys were sneaking around in the background for months, I assume. Tell me about that, how that happened and what that experience was like.
Yes. Actually, just about a year ago now, last September, the company that builds that model is called OpenAI. They got in touch with Sal Khan and I and said, we're training this new version of this model. And we knew we'd been keeping track of, they were at the time on version 3, and we knew what that was. And Bill Gates had told them not to come back to him for more funding until it could pass the AP Bio exam. So they needed some AP Bio questions. And you know who has a lot of AP Bio questions? Us. And we said, they're free on the internet, but we'll package them up for you. And here you go. But let's talk about what this might look like to be able to work together. And so they ended up that a couple of weeks later saying, we finished training the model. Do you want to see it? And so they gave Sal and I access to it through a Slack bot. If you're familiar with Slack, the chat application, we use it to chat with our coworkers. We could chat with GPT, what's now GPT-4, through Slack. And we spent a couple of days just going back and forth, Sal and I going, oh my gosh, look what we did. Oh my gosh, look what it's saying. This is crazy. And from there, basically took our roadmap. We have a roadmap of all the features we plan to build over the course of the year and threw it in the garbage and said, we're going to think about what we can build in the next, at the time, about 8 months to make use of this new model. And we were under a super strict NDA. Do not talk about this to anyone.
Including me. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And then in November, ChatGPT launched, and everyone, of course, wanted Khan Academy's view on ChatGPT. But we couldn't say, there's something better coming in March. Hold on. So we were, oh, yeah, it looks pretty interesting. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And in the meantime, in the background, we were building all of learning how to prompt engineer, doing all of the connecting of the guts of the data so it could go back and forth, and thinking about how we could do this safely. So for instance, on Khan Academy, all of your chats are logged and you have a chat transcript that's also, if you are under 18, visible to your parent or teacher. So things like that are kind of safety mechanisms that we wanted to build in if we were thinking about having kids under 18 use this. So that was 8 months of work. But yes, we had a head start and we got to launch with the launch of GPT-4.
Thanks for that fun story. So sometimes people that haven't worked in software development, they have this feel like you get the thing like the GPT-4, and then you just put an interface on it and bam, it's done. But you alluded to the fact that you have to make literally hundreds of design decisions. And in this case, where it's learning, and it could be minors, and it could be in other countries, and there's lots of complexities, languages. Can you just talk about some of those kind of design decisions that you brought largely from the educational perspective?
Yeah. So the first thing was this, when I said, can you just give me the answer? And it didn't. It really wanted to give us the answer. So one of the first things we had to do was figure out how to get it to not give students the answer. And so when you're writing these instructions for it that are called the prompt, we would try all these things. And it turns out if you write in capital letters, it's just like when you're texting each other and you write in capital letters, it's like you're shouting. We put in all caps, do not give the answer. And then finally it stopped giving the student the answer. We had to learn a lot of just basic things like that. But then we went back to the research literature on what makes a good human tutor and started figuring out how to build that into the experience and build that into the prompts that students were doing. A lot of that are things like, when do you keep trying to pull information from the student? And when is the student getting too frustrated and you need to intervene and give them a little information and move that? So instruction versus a Socratic dialogue, and how do you get it to do that? We haven't solved that totally. We're still trying to figure out where that balance is for different kinds of students and what that is. Those were some of the kinds of things. And then we started looking at what are the problems that we can solve, the learning problems we can solve using this. The things like, could we get it to give feedback on the steps? How do we think about engagement and motivations? That's one of the questions we get most from teachers is, how do I keep my students motivated? How do we keep them interested? And so the things that you saw, the chat with a literary character, or chat with a historical figure, we wanted to do those, but chat with a historical figure is fraught with what's going to happen if we ask about this. And so we put a lot of guardrails around it. Like our historical figures will not comment on current events. They will just comment on things from their time and work through those. So put a lot of those in there. We've actually gotten some criticism of how is talking to this historical figure different than a Wikipedia page and just reading it? But the difference is the engagement. Reading an article is very different than having a conversation with someone, even if the information you're getting back is the same. That thinking about what do we know about how students are motivated, and engagement was a big piece of this. And so all of that is not, if you just type something into ChatGPT, you're not getting any of that. And that was a lot of what we then brought as the wrapper around all of it to build in.
Okay, so that's great from a learning perspective. And I know you've been a long-standing learning scientist, but you've also been a data scientist. Tell us some of the cool, I can't believe a bunch of data and a bunch of parameters can do this kind of stories.
Yeah, it is sometimes amazing the things that it does. And when you know behind the scenes, it's just this data and probabilities that are creating these pieces. So that craft a story prompt, I was writing this mystery, and in my head, it was going to be a kid who it is an apartment complex, and there were all these shoes going missing, and it was going to be a dog that was stealing all the shoes. I start writing it, and it did the reveal. It knew that I was thinking it was going to be a dog that did this from just the little clues I was planting along the way. And it then wrote the two sentences like, I can't believe it was Rufus all along. And I was like, oh, did it figure that out? That is crazy. So those are what is going on. We have a story from a student who is one of our people who's testing it. They were reading Great Gatsby in class, and I will admit I have not read Great Gatsby since high school, but she was having a conversation with Great Gatsby and had a whole conversation about the symbolism of the light that's across the pond that symbolizes his hopes and dreams that are just out of reach. And then it comes back to her and asks, do you have hopes and dreams just out of reach? And had this whole conversation. And she was telling us about this conversation she had. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, how is it pulling all of that information, but also then having a conversation with you about it instead of just saying the light across the lake is symbolic of this, bringing it into feels like a conversation. So lots of just crazy things that it does. And you're like, gosh, how is this? Yeah. We call it having a little bit of magic.
As you started the conversation with, we've been around a long time. We were pre-big data. In the 90s, when Kristen was a student, I taught a class called The Analysis of Large Data because we had CDs then. It was before really large data, big data. So we had large data, and then we had big data. And then we had the deep learning revolution of the last 10 years. Now we have the generative AI revolution. Is it just a natural progression, or do you think we're a phase shift, something's changed?
So first, I think we shouldn't forget the things that came before. So right now, we have the generative AI acting like a tutor, but our next project.
Don't tell anyone. Happens in this room, stays in this room, except for the live feed.
Except for the live feed, is to take things we have learned about the structure of the domain of math, what skills are prerequisite to other skills, that we have built those models from less sophisticated analysis of our millions of data points from students interacting with the site, not the generative AI. And so if we feed that into, and we feed what we know about you in terms of your skill mastery on different skills into Conmigo, then it starts to be a more personalized experience that also uses data from, what were machine learning kinds of models, give better advice, give better recommendations to you specifically and what that looks like. So the first is you can describe all of this as new revolutions, but I don't think the new means we have to abandon everything that came before. We should think about what we can pull from what we had before to use with the new thing and how it sits together. I think I see this more as another new tool that we can have in our toolbox with the other tools that came before, and we can figure out how they should work together.
Okay, so that's good for you guys. But what about like for the rest of the world? We're like, oh my gosh, what's your, as a person in life, that opens the refrigerator and doesn't just make world-changing technologies. What's your next?
Yeah. So first is I am not one of those people who thinks that this is all going to take over the world and become we've all seen the science fiction movie. We're not there yet. The folks that I talk to who are the engineers who are making this stuff don't think that's what's coming. So I think that's the first thing. And I think that the fun thing about this is that this has made computing really accessible. So I can tell this model what to do by writing in plain English, as opposed to having to learn how to code to tell this model what to do. So I actually think this technology in some ways democratizes our access to these, what seem to be new, ever-changing technologies. Hey, I can control this just by telling it, act like a Socratic tutor. Act whatever you want it to be, and it will respond in that way. So I think it actually opens things up. And I think ChatGPT was made such a big splash because it provided that interface for people to interact with it. The models that they put behind it had been in existence for about a year, but suddenly we could all interact with it in using normal language. So I think it's actually, this new advance is interesting in the way that it lets us all use it instead of having to be a specialist to use it.
Okay. So it will those ways you prompted to, except when it doesn't. So we have this whole problem called hallucination. It gets in areas of low data or low probability, and it doesn't have strong kind of direction, and it will just say what it's going to say without strong direction, which we call hallucinations. How did you handle that in your world?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we did. So first, when we first started interacting with it, it was terrible at math. And we are most known for being a math help. So that was not good. So we did we have probably 3 or 4 different things that we did to get better math responses. So we did a little bit of training with OpenAI on the model itself, and that's now built into that model. Specifically, not even the math questions themselves, but how to act like a math tutor. And so we did some work to try to get some improvement there. We actually have a thing that's behind the scenes now where when a student is in a math problem, we have added an extra step where it's going and checking the math before it's answering the student. So it's going through a math check before it's saying that's right or wrong and where those students are. So there's a number of things that we did to make it better. It's still not perfect. So the second thing we had to do was to help people understand that it can be wrong sometimes, and they should not view the output of this as the final word and should be doing themselves checks to think, does that answer make sense? Is that really the right answer? So we help understand when it's most likely to be wrong, help provide guidance on how to do some of the checking. And then finally thinking about, if you look, there's right at the top of the screen, it actually says conmigo can be wrong. Click to find out why and provide some explanation of actually why it's sometimes wrong and what it's doing. None of that's perfect, but I think we all have to we've been talking for a long time about digital literacy for students and thinking about what that looks like. And AI literacy now has to be part of that.
Cool. So we talked about your different superpowers. One of them is learning research. I assume that you have some research going on about how your students are using this. And what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so when we first launched it was the end of the school year from last April to June. And we did a lot of qualitative kinds of research. So we had 2 big school districts that we were able, through some funding, to give this to for free. And so had students working on it and teachers working on it. And so we did classroom visits and observations and interviews with students and teachers and administrators, and just what's working, what's not working. What would you like this to do that it doesn't do now? What are those kinds of things? And then, of course, we also had their data on the back end so we could see what they were doing and what that looks like and what their conversations look like. And we also have a moderation flagging. So every student response goes through this moderation system that flags instances of violence and hate and self-harm and some of those kinds of things. But that all needs to be tuned to a threshold of when it raises a flag. And so initially we certainly didn't want any of that happening. So we set really high thresholds, but then kids would want to be talking about maybe they're studying World War II and they're talking about the weapon systems and suddenly they're getting flagged and it's all, oh, no, wait, we do want to have those conversations, but not these conversations. So there's a lot of tuning of those kinds of things. So in the qualitative research, we found a lot of things that first we talked to teachers, and the teachers, we launched with a couple of teacher activities. So we could write a humanities lesson plan. It was a rough piece, but teachers were like, wait, can this also help me write exit tickets? Those things in K-12, exit tickets are often questions that are handed out that give the students take 2 minutes to do, and it just gives the teacher a sense of did they get the lesson for the day or not. But the teacher has to come up with what is that question. Conmigo can actually write those. So we have a little write an exit ticket. We heard from that new teachers struggle to take that standards language and unpack it into learning objectives. So we said, can they do that? And we said, let's try. And so we built a whole bunch of new teacher activities based on the conversations we had with teachers about things that they wanted. We also observed in classrooms, and a lot of what happens in classrooms with using Khan Academy is students do it as independent practice. And it's often in a stations model where the teacher maybe has a small group that they're working with directly. There's another small group doing some kind of collaborative activity. And then there's another small group doing independent practice on Khan Academy. And then the students rotate. What happens when students are doing independent practice is they get stuck. And so then they're asking their friend, and no one knows how to do this. They don't know. So they raise their hand and then they sit there for 5 minutes and they start propping their hand up and they're tired. The teacher has to walk away from what they're doing and go help get them unstuck. It turns out that using Conmigo, it just can get you that little unstuckness and get you moving on and where you are. We saw that as a big common use case and a common things that folks were excited about. On the side of things that warning system that I told you about, district administrators told us they wanted that notification too because liability, all those things. So we added that to what things were going. We have in every response, students can give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to, or click on give feedback and write out responses. And so we go through every one of those written responses and tag them about what it is that they're concerned about, what they think it is. And it continues it's getting the math more right, but it's still, when it's tutoring, sometimes it's too positive. And hey, great job, good job. Yeah, no, that was totally wrong. So there's still cases where we need to continue to work on getting it positive, but not too positive. So lots of things like that. And then finally, we, did some quantitative comparisons. We had in one district that uses Khan Academy pretty frequently. We gave it to some classes, got access to it, and some didn't. That was not randomized, so cannot give any causal attribution here. But we did find that students who used Conmigo both were spending more time on Khan Academy and were getting more what we call skills to proficient. So Khan Academy is based on a mastery learning system, and you can go from attempted to familiar to proficient to mastered. We know from our separate efficacy research that if you get skills to proficient, you are more likely to see increases on other external achievement measures. So that skills to proficient, we saw more students getting more skills to proficient when they're using Conmigo than they aren't. All preliminary, non-causal relationships, but we did some good propensity score matching.
Very nice.
Feeling good.
Nice. Along that line, I'll just note to the audience that Kristen is suppressing all the technical language that I know she knows about all this AI stuff. The audience thanks you for that. So what do you think are some of the implications for higher ed? So you talked a lot about K-12 as you're apt to do, but we also know that many higher ed students use Khan, and people go from K-12 to higher ed using Khan all the way through. And so what are you thinking?
Clearly the headlines around ChatGPT were all related to education, were all about writing and plagiarism. And how are we going to know if someone just wrote their essay using ChatGPT and what that
Or now you can use Conmigo. Yeah.
No, Conmigo will not write your essay for you.
Okay.
Conmigo will walk you through writing your essay, but it will not write it for you. And the teachers who are using it can look at your chat transcript and see how much Conmigo did and how much you did. But let's be real, any high school or college student knows how to also access ChatGPT and think about that. I think there are significant implications of how we think about the learning experience that we have in classrooms and what should that look like and what happens in class. And I've been talking to a lot of folks about what is the approach to writing now and what does that look like? Is it writing in class? Is it giving writing assignments? ChatGPT does not know what you did in class yesterday. If you're giving assignments that are relating to specific things that ChatGPT would not have knowledge of, it's not going to do a good job writing those essays. But that's things about creating different kinds of assignments for students. We've also seen some professors are out there saying, yes, go ahead and use ChatGPT, but you also need to submit a summary of how you used it as part of your process. Did you write an initial draft and then submit it for editing? And then you submit that as a package to say, hey, here's what I did and what that is. I think I'm a fan of that kind of approach because ultimately these tools are what people are going to use when they're in jobs in the world. Lots of people I know at universities are using it to, let's say, draft letters of recommendation or those kinds of tools. And then to say to students, oh, but you can't use it. We're not preparing them to then be able to use it as they go into their careers and life. I think finding ways in higher ed to think about how we can help students understand what it's good for, what it's not good for, and use it as part of their work are the most promising approaches.
Well, I have a question on the behalf of some of our students, which is your undergraduate degrees in psychology from a liberal arts school, your Ph.D.s in educational psychology, but then you worked at Cisco, which was a high-tech company. You worked in global e-learning. You worked at Pearson, which was a global education company, global technology-related influence in the company. Explain to me, here at Con, which is a global high-tech company, you work as in leading a product management, you drive lots of the strategy and the direction, and teams report up to you that do the technical work. Explain to our students this relationship between technology and the liberal arts.
Yeah, first, you all are in the right place. It's a lot easier to get the liberal arts education and then learn technology along the way than I think it is to do a software engineering and then try to figure out how to think about. But I think this is the big piece is technology is inextricably tied to our society. And so technology does not operate in a vacuum. And if you don't understand the context that it's going to operate in, you can't design technology. And this is a whole problem generally in the educational technology space generally, but it's true, I think, in all kinds of technology. But in educational technology, there's a lot of technologists, a lot of people who maybe made it big in software that say, I can fix the education problem. And they come at it from a technology solution. And it turns out their great technology solution in no way fits into a classroom, fits into what teachers do, fits into how teachers think. And so guess what? It doesn't get adapted and it dies. You have to understand the context and the place and how everyone functions and the systems that we all function in order to understand how to design and build technology. And the liberal arts provides that training of how do people think, how do societies function, what does it mean to be human? All of those are liberal arts kinds of questions. And with that background, then you can understand, hey, how do we build technology to fit into that society? Or even if you want to be a disruptor, you've got to understand the system that you're trying to disrupt with that technology in order to do that. So I really think that this grounding of how people think, how we work together as a society is key to then designing technology and what it can be.
Thank you for that. That leads me to my last question before we open it to our larger community. And here at Notre Dame, we have this thing. It's called Catholicism. And
I married into it.
Oh, that's right. And one of the basic tenets of Catholicism, Christianity in general, is that we're all connected. We're all made in the image and likeness of God. So we're all part of the same connectedness to God and the universe. And we have this idea that because of that, we need to act differently in the world. And whether somebody has that kind of religious lens or we think it's super important to emphasize dignity and development. We have this idea of integral development. What in this, as a leader in technology applied in society, what can you say to us? What should we be thinking about as a community that has these values?
I think we need to understand what we value most. What are the things that are most important to us? And those are the things we need to prioritize above anything that, as you're thinking about what can new technology do? What is it? If we prioritize the connections between us, then we need to think about, all right, how do we build technology in a way that supports those connections as opposed to trying to break them? How do we make technology facilitates us connecting more as opposed to trying to do something that just helps us sit at our computers and typing by ourselves all day? So we need to think about, okay, if connection is that value, all right, how can we design technology there? What are the other fundamental things that we think are important for us as people and us as humans? And then from there, start building technology to design that. I also think there's something about we need to build technology as a community instead of building it in silos, because if we are making sure that the folks that we actually want to be the users of technology are involved in the creation of it, we are much more likely to build something that aligns to our values and helps keep us connected as opposed to breaking us down and really severing those connections that are so important for us.
Well, thanks so much. Okay, now it's that part of our conversation where we open it up to the larger room. Can you come up to the microphone? If you all will come up to the microphone.
Hi, Kristen. Thanks so much for taking the time. My name's Neve. I'm a master's student here at Notre Dame, and I'm actually working on my thesis at the moment, which focuses on the intersection of education and generative AI. So this is really relevant to me. But I'd love to get a sense from you. What do you see as the future of immersive learning, leveraging extended reality, or is there anything that Khan Academy is doing in the space?
Yeah, so as many virtual reality, augmented reality have been around for a few years, we at Khan Academy have not jumped into that yet because we think that right now a lot of the equipment and things required to do it are beyond the reach of most classrooms. And so we're not quite ready to scale it yet. But I think the fundamental question is, what is the learning problem that these technologies can solve? As opposed to saying, look at this cool technology, let's build something with it. Let's think about what is the thing that technology lets us do that we could never do before. In the way that the generative AI, we jumped into that because we said, we have been trying to create a tutor that can have a conversation with students for the last 30 years. Here's a technology that can help us do that. So what is the learning problem to be solved that being able to be immersed in a new scenario can solve? So the place that I see right now that technology being used most is in workforce training. So I have a friend who is working on simulations that train automotive technicians to be able to do their jobs in a virtual reality kind of environment. Robotic training for surgeons is a huge area. So it's more of those kinds of procedural skills. That seems to be a clear problem where turns out training surgeons on actual people is a little bit high risk, and having better environments to do that is really helpful. So I would say start with the learning problems and figure out then what technology can help solve them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Wes. I'm a client. I'm a Ph.D. student in Peace Studies and Sociology, a dual program. I was really interested in the part where you're speaking about education research indicates that there's some roles that only humans can fill, and this is essential. And then you were saying that ethical proposition that you wouldn't necessarily want to have an AI fulfill this function if you could. So I was curious if you have a sort of operationally, as a Khan Academy operationally has a sort of principle of like where that line is in terms of, oh no, we've become too human here with this AI. And then also if you have any instances where you were like, oh, we could do this, but this would be pushing it too far into the realm of being human. Thanks.
Yeah. One of the things, what we didn't want to happen was for particularly, you can imagine a fifth or sixth grader to think they're talking to a human when they're talking to AIs. We don't want to anthropomorphize Khan Academy, Khanmigo. So Khanmigo does not have a human name. Khanmigo is an it. We took a lot of the language where it would say sometimes, I feel, or I'm feeling sad. No, it's not allowed to do things like communicate emotions or those kinds of things. So that's some of the work that we've done to not have those human characteristics and where those are. In terms of, we don't have it's hard to write a principle of this is where the line is. So I can't say we have that, but we do generally have the principle of not making Conmigo act and sound like a human in what we do.
John knows what I'm going to ask already, probably. I'm in charge of our honor code and of overseeing academic dishonesty. And so I've spent the last 9 months trying to find the balance between this really good tutoring support for students. If a student can't do a math problem, it's so great that they can go online and get the next step. I wish I had that in college. But the part I'm more concerned about, or want to ask more about, so I've been thinking as I look at how students are using generative AI, it seems like the important question is, has learning, but if they're using it, is this appropriate or inappropriate? Have they learned something? And I think in a lot of this, they have. The one I'm more worried about is where they write 2 lines and then Conmigo writes 2 lines and they go back and forth. And then if a student submits that whole thing as their work, that one makes me a little bit more nervous. I think some learning has happened, but on the other hand, that doesn't completely reflect their own effort. That was the one piece that's making me a little more nervous. I wondered if you could.
Sure, yeah. So I think that with all of these, we have them as, let's try this out and see what it is. And that one is more like a party trick. This is a fun activity, engaging activity to do, as opposed to I'm going to be writing something that I'm submitting for an assignment to do. But a couple of our fail-safes on this are the transcript. It's clear on that one what the Conmigo wrote and what the student wrote and what goes back and forth. When we are offering this to school districts, it's giving them all of that access, and it's allowing, there's also a thing for teachers where it can summarize the chats that students are having and pull them ahead. So I think that activity is meant to be something that is an engaging writing activity for students that are learning to write, as opposed to your assignment is to write a story and then they're going to use this to do it. We're also working on an editing interface and thinking about how we do feedback on writing, and do we want to go there, and what does that look like? So we're asking a lot of those questions too about what this looks like, how to do that. So I suppose there is a use case for a 10-year-old who's not in a Khan Academy school, but so for independent learners to access Conmigo, we do request a $9 a month donation not because we're making any money, because all of this back and forth costs money. Like we get a bill every month from OpenAI, and we don't want the AI bankrupts Khan Academy headline. That would not be good. So but you can imagine a 10-year-old whose parent has donated to Khan Academy, and so they, as a student, have access to Conmigo, and their teacher's given them an assignment to write a mystery story. And they go to Conmigo and write that. Now, their parent is still going to be able to see their transcript. That's some kind of fail-safe. But there's still the potential, I think, that the 10-year-old could use that and then submit it as their own writing and what that looks like. So I think you can figure out those use cases that are down that path and think, how common is that use case? How likely is that to happen? The parents using it and not monitoring it and figuring all of that out. Right now, we're saying we're going to call that an acceptable risk. But as we move forward, we might say, you know what? Nope, that's something that we need to mitigate. Let's figure out how we can come up with solutions that make it so that's not as likely to happen. To go back to the cost, ideally, the use of these models cost is going to come down, and we'll be able to offer it for free or near free, in which case much more 10-year-olds might be trying to use it, and that will cause us then to clamp down on some of these things.
Hi, everyone. This talk has really made me have thoughts that I haven't thought of before. So while I structure my question, please bear with me while I try to put my thoughts together. But you've been really talking about how Conmigo and using AI for education is reshaping how we learn. But throughout your explanation of how students interact with the software, it's really made me consider how you've been alluding to how it deals with reshaping how we struggle with learning. And it made me think back to all the moments when I was like doing my math homework and I was sitting there and I was at home, for example, not in class. And I didn't have the teacher to come to me and get me out of being stuck when I was stuck. And whenever these moments happened, I think back to how my process of learning how to learn came from the moments when I had the aha. I finally figured out how to get myself unstuck. And considering that, how I said before, I phrased it in a way that was like AI is reshaping how we struggle. I wanted to know if you ever thought about, or if you have any research, or even what your thoughts would be about how, in many ways, having this tool that can help us be unstuck is going to get rid of the aha moments that are not only helping us not make fast mistakes, but reshaping how we learn and learn how to learn. And if in any moment the tool can be better perfected to take that into account, that's the best way that I can put my thoughts into words right now.
No, that's a great question. In the education research space, there's something called productive struggle. If you want to read more about this, look for productive struggle. The key is not all struggle is productive struggle. And so what we need to try to do is to better detect when is productive struggle and when is the student hitting the frustration point and giving up, checking out, going to some other online site that is not Khan Academy and just getting the answer. What are the things that we can do to support good struggle, but intervene before the student gets to that level of frustration and confusion that is unproductive struggle? We're not there yet, but part of what we're doing as we think about what good tutors do is if you're sitting next to a human, that's what a good tutor is doing, is figuring out like when to nudge you along and when to try to pull it out of you and give you those aha moments. So that's the goal that we're trying to get to, and we'll see if we can get there. There's some other folks before the generative AI folks that do research in like emotion detection. And actually there's a professor who used to be here, Sydney DeMello, yes, that do try to detect things like frustration and confusion from students as they're engaging in different kinds of educational technology. If we're keeping our eye on that work, we don't think it's quite ready to be integrated into what we're doing yet. But I think thinking about that kind of detection is an interesting space for us to move forward and make sure people get those aha moments still that you experience.
What I think about a lot is really just how to talk to people about AI and how to talk to them in a ChatGPT context and outside of a ChatGPT context. What has me curious right now is the question of why are folks so worried? And I'm curious, this summer I remember reading the New York Times published a quote that the human being should never be secondary to the human experience, something along those lines. And that felt very alarmist to me, and yet it resonated with a lot of people. So I'm curious as to, from your background in human psychology, what do you think are the elements of this conversation that having people take such an alarmist standpoint?
Yeah. So one is the very practical question of, is AI going to take our jobs? Is AI going to do, am I not going to have a job? The question that John started. And so that's hitting people in their pocketbooks and where they're thinking, oh gosh, this is scary. And so that's worrisome. It is very hard to find a science fiction book that has a good positive ending about a lot of this artificial intelligence. So I think some of us have spent years reading about how bad this could be. And suddenly, I think this generative AI has gotten us a lot closer to some of those dystopian outcomes in terms of what it looks like. Suddenly, you almost think sometimes, what is going on here? And so that makes people, I think, pretty nervous and it seems unsettling to them. So I think that's a piece of it. And then in the education space, I think there's been so much coverage that I have a slide sometimes when I do slides that just has headlines from the college essay is dead. This is all where no one's ever going to write again, and all of these kind of alarmist things. But I think it's reasonable to think, hey, there's this thing that produces all of this text, and that is a skill that we've thought of as uniquely human. And now suddenly a computer can do that. What does that mean for us as humans? And so it just is acting, I think, more and more like a human. And so that's probably appropriately alarming to people, and we want to think about raised all of these questions about how do we make sure that humans are still in charge. So I think there's good reason for some of the alarm that we've seen around it, but we do think there are lots of, as you can see, positive applications that we're trying to highlight too.
It was an absolute pleasure. And I just want to remind everyone sign up for the future series. You can sign up at think.nd.edu. Thanks for everyone in the audience and thanks for everyone online.